Okay, so I think I'll just jump in now and apologise for this video being out a little late. I have to confess, I unplugged the charger for my iPad this morning when I was making an omelette for breakfast. So after working on some other non-YouTube stuff this morning and then 2 other videos, I took a little break to recharge the iPad, plugged it into the charger, went and did a bunch of other stuff, checked about an hour later, and it was 10% lower than it had been an hour earlier because I hadn't actually plugged in the charger to the power point. So I've just been letting it sit and charge, and now it's getting quite late in the day. So before I keep going with this video, I'll just mention for anyone who is on TikTok, I now have a Ninchi True Crime TikTok account, which I will endeavour to start adding things to. I will be putting things on there that won't be going on YouTube, but I'll also be uploading some of my shorts there. I have uploaded a few YouTube shorts that are currently not on YouTube because one creator apparently doesn't understand the concept of fair use and put in a privacy claim against those 2 YouTube shorts. Anyway, moving on from that. So this is part 3 of my review of the interview with Tyler Wallace. There's been a few interesting things come out. If you caught yesterday's video, part 2, or possibly the day before by now, if you caught that, you probably caught the wonderful statement that Jen told Tyler that Stefan was a biomechanical engineer, which is quite possibly the most hilarious thing I've heard throughout this entire case. Possibly, maybe the Stefan being hung up on by his father could trump that. I'm not sure. You tell me which you think is better. Now, one rather important thing that came up from yesterday's video that I need to clarify, me being an Australian, I wasn't thinking time zones. So in terms of him talking about driving from Texas to Orlando, my brain simply did the calculations of, okay, that's like driving from Bendigo to Byron Bay, which is even beyond Sydney, which is a decent drive. So in my mind, I was still in the same time zone because I was driving north instead of driving across the country. So apparently there's an hour's difference between Texas and Orlando. So with him saying that, and just correct me if I get it wrong, with him saying that Jen rang him around 4 or 5 p.m, that would equate to 5 or 6 p.m. Orlando time. Is that correct? So yeah, that is something important that definitely I needed to clear up, and I apologise, I wasn't even thinking in terms of time zones. And I realise that you guys probably do it automatically because I know here in Australia we do it automatically. If I was talking about Western Australia, I'd be thinking, okay, well, they're 4 hours behind us, and calculating what time it was there, which totally off the topic, but it just made me realise, for those of you who are following my coverage of the Phoebe Bishop case, her ringing her boyfriend in Western Australia at 8:30 in the morning, for him that was 4:30 in the morning. She would have known that. That was probably an important phone call before it got cut off. Anyway, apologies for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. It's a missing person's case in Australia, missing 17-year-old. I won't go into it here because this is about Maddie, but you can go and find my Phoebe Bishop playlist if you are interested. Okay, so I think I've covered all the preliminaries here. So let's just jump back into this interview.
And so I do have a working theory with what I think happened. I am aware that this is all speculation, but if you'd like to hear that, I will share with you what I suspect may have happened.
Okay. What do you think?
So the only thing that makes sense to me at this point is I've heard stories that possibly Stefan had stabbed somebody when he was 14 and that his dad had moved him across country. I've heard an article that maybe a former roommate had seen on Stefan's computer and that Stefan's mother had paid off the roommate. I don't know the veracity of those things, but...
So obviously he's talking about the former friends of Stefan who rang up Grey Hughes. We know now that they are real people and that probably a percentage of their story is real. I actually do believe the stories about the stabbing. Well, we know the stabbing occurred because his parents said it, but they carefully avoided mentioning that he was 14, but his friends managed to fill us in on that. I also wouldn't be surprised about his mother paying off a roommate. I think we've all managed to get a pretty good idea of what the real Deb Stearns is like, and I wouldn't put it past her in the least. Now, in terms of those interviews, if you've not had a chance to listen to them, I don't have the uninterrupted versions of them, obviously, because it's not my content to share, but I have done videos on each of Stefan's childhood friends where I have done a discussion on each one, basically listening through their interviews. So you can find them on my Maddie Soto playlist. I do recommend listening to those videos, whether it is by going over to Grey Hughes' channel and watching them without interruptions, or if you go looking on my playlist, you'll be able to find all those interviews on my Maddie Soto playlist, where I have basically done my usual kind of discussion of each of those.
Those are what got me thinking on the mindset of, okay, so if his family moved him to avoid legal consequences for deviant behavior in the past, and he claims he worked at Disney, which I know Jennifer has always been around Disney, and so I'm thinking to myself, what would a predator do to find access to a child? Maybe they would go get a job at some place like Disney where there's high access passively to children and just observe, and then when he located a child that was of his taste, maybe he saw that Maddie was approaching Jennifer regularly, introduced himself.
And there you have the origins of the story that was put out there for so long, that Jen met Stefan at Disney. I just want to make a mention of the fact that this other supposed flatmate of Jen's made that claim, which is one of the many reasons why I believe that person was a fake. Because we know that Jen did not meet Stefan through Disney, and that Stefan got his Disney job through Jen, but that in fact they met when they were both working for Stefan's parents.
It has always been my opinion that Jennifer has not been as attentive of a mother as I would like. I feel like my daughter got passed around Jennifer's family for things like daycare quite often, and that whenever I wanted to get into contact with Maddie, it was difficult because I never knew when she was going to be home or available.
Sorry, I know I'm butting in quite frequently here, but he's moving so quickly through what he's saying that it's just easier to address each one of these things separately rather than to sit there, make notes, and then have to go back and think about each one to cover it. So, First of all, I have no doubt that Jen was basically passing Maddie around the family and getting them to basically be daycare for her. It certainly seems to be her pattern. She used Stephen Young to be Maddie's carer when she was married. She had Juan looking after Maddie a lot of the time. She had Yolanda looking after Maddie a lot of the time. We hear Stephanie was driving Maddie to and from school on occasion. Basically, Jen would fob her off to anyone that she could, by the sounds of it. I'd like to know if this has always been the case, even before Jen met Stephen, and if this has been what Tyler has faced since Maddie was a baby. Now, having said all that, I would put money on the fact that not every single time when Tyler rang to try and make contact with Maddie was she absent. I would imagine that was just one of Jen's excuses to try and prevent him having contact. Hearing him say that does make me think that Jen was being manipulative in terms of how much contact Tyler was allowed to have with Maddie, and using Maddie not being present as an excuse to prevent him from speaking to Maddie. So the question there, of course, is at what age did Maddie have her own mobile phone? At what age could Tyler have begun making contact on Maddie's phone? And is that why he was saying, after her more recent visit, that he felt he could start making contact? We know he didn't make a very good job of doing that, but is it because on that last visit he was finally able to get Maddie's contact number as opposed to Jen's contact number, and having to rely on her to be able to get access to Maddie? That said, I'm going to go back to what I said yesterday, and if you want it to happen enough, you're going to make it happen. Ringing up Jen and being told, oh no, she's at Yolanda's, or she's with Juan, shouldn't be something that stops you from trying to make contact with your daughter. There was nothing preventing him from saying, okay, well, can I have Yolanda's phone number so I can ring Yolanda and speak to Maddie? Or can you tell me what time Maddie will be home? Can you tell me a time that suits so I can actually make contact? And of course, if she continues to prevent him from making contact with Maddie, then he had legal avenues that he could pursue. So I suspect that Jen probably knew that he wouldn't push things and took advantage of that and used that to prevent him gaining access to Maddie, knowing that he wouldn't really push things.
And I think that maybe Stefan saw that as a predator and saw that that was a pretty easy environment to insert himself into their life. I then suspect he set up a... And at what point I become curious watching shows like Dexter or things like that is, okay, what fucked up their schedule then? How did he go from this patient calculating monster who did all of these things to being emotionally incompetent and disposing of a body off the side of a fucking road? I just don't understand what changed their behavior. And I say there because I started watching... It took me a couple of days to have the emotional space, but I started watching interviews of them when they were reaching out to the news outlets. Jennifer told me they were going to reach out to the news outlets when Maddie was missing, so I knew she had done that, but I just hadn't watched the interviews. And when I watched the interviews, Stefan is in a couple of them, and I was watching his body language, but then because I was doing that and some YouTube videos about body language came out, I was looking at Jennifer's body language, and it's like, I saw very strong emotions in her, but they seemed like anxiety, like not grief, not she was waiting at home while our daughter was still missing. Like that, I literally can't wrap my brain around that. It doesn't make sense to me. And so what I suspect happened is something that they couldn't avoid, something like maybe or something. And they realized, like, oh, fuck, we can't get an abortion, we can't hide this. Maybe they did something. I don't know. I don't know if Jennifer was involved or wasn't. Maybe Stefan did all this on his own and she just found out. That's where my head is at. And that's why I was like, you know what? I think I want to set up separate updates with the police department, because I just don't know. I just don't like the fact that everything I know about my daughter has been filtered through that family to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we need to be careful with this interview from Tyler, because on surface level it sounds like he's saying that, yeah, you know, he watched these interviews with Jen and to him, you know, she was lying, she looked complicit. But the other bits of information that he's given here we also need to take into account, and that is him saying that he's watched a lot of YouTube and he watched body language analyses. So what he's expressing here is not necessarily what his first opinion was when he watched Jen in these interviews. This is him expressing what he's seen on YouTube, and I'm starting to think that he's a bit of a sponge in terms of he will watch things on YouTube and internalise those ideas as his own. That said, he's not going to take on board things that don't fit with what he knows of Jen, don't fit with what his gut is telling him. So if his gut is telling him the total opposite of something that he's watching on YouTube, then he's probably going to question what it is he's watching. So it's possible that he was already leaning in the direction of Jen being complicit, which made him more susceptible to taking on other people's opinions. So what I'm trying to say here is basically, it seems that he does believe Jen to be more than capable of being complicit in this, in one way or other. And that in looking for answers, he's basically taken on the opinions of YouTubers who have put out their opinions of Jen's body language, her language, all that sort of stuff. But he is spot on about the interview. She is definitely, in those news interviews, she is anxious. She's not concerned. She's not showing concern. She's not showing distress. She's showing anxiety. And the anxiety spikes when asked about the laptop, and one of the family members says, yeah, if it's switched on, it can be traced. And you see her anxiety levels go through the roof. So Tyler's not wrong. But we do need to be cautious in terms of theories that he's sharing, because I suspect that some of the theories he's sharing are not things that he's come up with on his own based on knowledge of Jen, but theories that have been put forward by YouTubers who don't know Jen. And yes, that could be people like myself. Now, I do agree with him in terms of, I think Stefan did choose to become involved with Jen because he saw that he had access to Maddie. But like I mentioned in yesterday's video, or in the previous video, whenever that was now, Jen is manipulative. I don't for 1 minute believe that Jen was a victim. Jen allowed Stefan into Maddie's life because it was convenient for her. Jen probably saw Stefan's interest in Maddie and thought, Ripper, here's a free babysitter for me. Someone who I can hook up with, I think that's her term, who can basically take Maddie off her hands anytime she decided she wanted to check out and not be a mother. Now, as for Tyler's theory that it was somehow pre-planned, I don't buy that. I've never bought that. I think he is quite susceptible to suggestion. He's heard that, and he's so bitter and angry about Jen that he's basically gone for whatever can allow him to feel angriest at her. I definitely believe that Jen knew what was going on in terms of the filming stuff and the activities related to the filming. There's been so many things that she's said in interviews that make it seem pretty clear that she knew that. I also believe that at some point in time, Stefan made her aware that Maddie was not alive and that she helped him to cover it up. But based on everything we've heard from Stefan, based on what we know of his personality, I don't believe that this was premeditated in terms of planned prior to Stefan going there. Yes, he may be up for premeditated, but in terms of that simply can mean that if he had rugged her, or if he basically had an option to stop at any point in time and he chose to continue, which resulted in Maddie being unalived, then that's when you still have premeditated. Premeditated doesn't mean that you sat there and planned it out. Premeditated can be basically a decision made in the moment where instead of choosing to stop, you continued. Or where you've chosen actions that eventually lead to the unaliving.
I'm sorry, that's my piece.
That's okay. Have you, when you and Jennifer were together, was she on any kind of medication or anything like that, or do you know if she's been on any medication since?
She was never open with me when we were together. I do know that since we dated, she's been diagnosed with bipolar. I don't know what medication she's currently on, but I know that she's been on medications as hardcore as lithium in the past.
Okay. What about Maddie?
I don't remember the names of the medications, but I was informed when Maddie came to visit me that she was on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. Do you know the names of them?
Yes, hydroxyzine was one of them. She would take at night. I didn't feel comfortable giving because I take hydroxyzine to go to sleep, and I only and so I was only one while she was here with us visiting. The other one was Miralax, so she could go to the restroom regularly.
Okay. Now, when you were giving her the medication to help her sleep, did she have a prescription bottle with her?
Yes, there's a prescription bottle.
And on the prescription, did it say? So that's what the doctor had prescribed her?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I find it really interesting that while Stephen Young was aware of Jen being medicated and all that sort of stuff. When it comes to Tyler, he's saying Jen was never open with him about what kind of meds she was on. It's a completely different relationship between her and Tyler as opposed to her and Stephen. And I think when you take into account her saying that Stefan was a biomechanical engineer or whatever, Jen obviously felt somewhat inadequate around Tyler. So I'm guessing that that's why she never really was open with him about her medication. It's interesting that she actually did tell him about her bipolar. Maybe it was something that she used as a manipulation tactic after Maddie was born. If what Tyler says is correct about her trying to break up him and Tatiana, she may have been trying to manipulate him to feel sorry for her and feel that he needed to be with her to help look after Maddie or something ridiculous like that. Now, this concerns me. Jen telling Tyler that Maddie was on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. And the medications that she sent with Maddie did not include Maddie's ADHD medications. The medications she sent was the Miralax and the hydroxyzine, meaning that while she was claiming the hydroxyzine was to help Maddie sleep, she was telling Tyler that it was for depression and anxiety. And what I find really interesting is that while I get the impression that for Tatiana, the relationship with Maddie was perhaps a little bit awkward because of her being Jen's daughter, maybe there was, just a little bit of a barrier there. You see that in some of the early photos of Maddie where I wonder if she was still trying to come to terms with the fact that her husband had a daughter with another woman who actually fell pregnant while her and Tyler were together, and who, according to Tyler, was trying to break up their marriage. So you can understand that there would be a little bit of underlying awkwardness with regards to Maddie, and yet she is the only person out of the whole damn lot who has expressed concerns over the fact that Maddie was on hydroxyzine. This is someone who has a solid understanding of hydroxyzine and who has clearly realised that it is not a drug that should be prescribed for a minor. I've said this in previous videos. I actually did an entire video talking about Maddie's medications. Hydroxyzine is what is known as a psychotropic medication. Sure, it's the same as Benadryl, apparently. When given to children for allergies, in other words, not long term, but periodically given to children for allergies, it has been shown to have permanent, long-lasting effects on brain development. It is a psychotropic medication that basically means that the medication itself goes through the blood-brain barrier, meaning that it does actually affect the brain. And in a developing child, it's going to affect the development of the brain. The brain is still growing until a child turns 14, or until around 14, growing in size. And then it is still developing until their mid-20s. So any sort of these drugs are going to have a huge impact on the developing brain. And yet, apparently, Tatiana was the only one who ever questioned whether or not those meds were appropriate for Maddie. She's saying that it was an actual prescription bottle. So I'm just going to say outright, whoever the quack is that was treating Maddie truly was a quack. She should not have been on hydroxyzine. And if there was confusion over Maddie's symptoms of ADHD to the point where they wondered if she may have also had ASD, autism spectrum disorder, then there should have been further psychological tests, further discussions had with Maddie to make sure that it wasn't PTSD, because sadly that was missed. Maddie may have also had ADHD, but we'll never know. The thing is, ADHD and PTSD, in Maddie's case it would be complex PTSD, the symptoms are so similar that it can be difficult to tell them apart. And you'd really need to look right back at a child's history to when they were particularly young to get some idea. But at the same time, a child can also have both ADHD and PTSD. Anyway, you're probably sick of hearing me talking about that.
Tyler, did you have any discussions with Jennifer about medicine that Maddie was taking?
Never.
Okay.
Did I remember? I don't think Jennifer ever really told me about their visits. It was just that when I was responsible for Maddie, she would rattle off a list of what I was responsible to make sure she got.
Okay. And when Maddie come to visit you, what were the sleeping arrangements like?
Maddie slept in the bed with Topsy. I wanted to sleep with them and kind of make a little Maddie sandwich, and she was not very keen on that idea, so she made sure that I slept on the couch. Sometimes we cuddled, but that was the sleeping arrangements. Is usually she'd sleep in the bedroom with Topsy and I'd sleep on the couch.
I'm sorry, but particularly given what Maddie went through, I find it so triggering to hear him talking about wanting to make a little Maddie sandwich. Now, what's really important to note here, though, is that Maddie was 12. Maddie was approaching her 13th birthday. She was, 3 or 4 months off her 13th birthday when she went and stayed with Tyler and Tatiana. And because this was a new relationship, essentially, this was her in a different environment. She felt confident enough to say to them, no, I don't want Tyler in the bed with me. She was happy to share a bed with Tatiana, but she didn't want Tyler in the bed with her. First of all, that shows us, just how traumatised poor Maddie was. That, I can't imagine how it must have felt for her to have another male wanting to share a bed with her, and she probably thought it was all the same stuff again. But let's go back to Maddie basically expressing no, she did not want to share a bed with Tyler also. So I believe this was October. We know that Stefan moved out at the beginning of December. So after this time with Tyler and Tatiana, she only had to put up with Stefan for a few more months. We know he came back at Christmas time. If you look at the charge sheet, we know that he did stuff again Christmas Eve. I never know how to say that respectfully for Maddie, or in a way that's not going to trigger people. But we also know that Maddie's counsellor at school had been talking to her about being assertive and learning to essentially speak up with herself, learning to say to Jen when things were calm, I don't like this situation, I don't like the way you talk to me or the way you yell at me and that sort of thing. So where am I going with this? She's felt confident enough in October to say to these two people that she doesn't know very well, no, I don't want Tyler in the bed with me. She's obviously becoming more aware of what's comfortable for her, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Unfortunately, them making that suggestion of Tyler sleeping with her may have caused more confusion with her, making her think that, well, it is just normal for the man to sleep in the bed with me as well. But did she become more and more confident about speaking up for herself? Did speaking up for herself with Tatiana and Tyler encourage her, especially after being encouraged by her counsellor, to try and speak up for herself with Stefan on that night that Jen sent her upstairs with Stefan? Did Maddie try and speak up for herself and things didn't go so well?
Okay, whose idea was it to have what you referred to as like the Maddie sandwich? Who wasn't uncomfortable with it, Tatiana or Maddie?
I believe it was Maddie who was uncomfortable with it. She didn't straight up say, I don't want to cuddle, but she would cuddle with me when it was just me and her, and I believe she'd cuddle with you when it was just you and her, but when we were together, she would become a little bit more shy, is the word I would use.
Okay, crap. I don't like what I'm hearing there. Maddie was comfortable cuddling up with Tyler, snuggling up with Tyler. He's her father, so, okay, nothing inappropriate there. She was comfortable snuggling up with Tatiana, but when it was both of them together, that's when Maddie became uncomfortable. Okay, I just had to stop and pause and try and figure out how to say this, how to word it without being too explicit. Maddie's problem when she was with Tyler and Tatiana wasn't so much about Tyler as the man giving her cuddles or snuggling with her or sharing a bed with Tatiana. Her problem was with having an adult female and an adult male sandwiching her. She was uncomfortable with being close to the two of them at one time. Is it just because when she shared a bed with Jen and Stefan, she was stuck in the middle and had no way of escaping? Or is there more to it? More to the issue of sharing a bed with Jen and Stefan together? It just concerns me because I would expect her to be more reactive to being close with Tyler than being reactive to being close to the two of them at once. Maybe I'm just reading too much into the situation, and I know that trauma can present in different ways and that maybe there is something to do with that kind of association that really doesn't necessarily fall back on Jen. but it does make me feel a little bit uncomfortable with regards to Jen and Jen's relationship to Maddie. I'm just going to leave it at that. And, please don't come at me for it. I'm just expressing something that to me sounds a little bit concerning.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, when she would sleep at night, me having children myself, sometimes children, they kind of flop all over the place when they're sleeping. Did you notice anything like that with Maddie?
Yes, I will say I also sleep like that, and Tati had commented on how Maddie sleeps just like me. I very much thrash a lot, and Maddie was a kicker and a mover and a thrasher.
Okay, did it seem like she got good night's sleep, or she was up and down?
Once I gave her the medicine, she was fine. Like, she would go to sleep.
Without the medication, she was more like me, though, where insomnia would set in, and in the evening, our emotions would... She literally told me one night, "I'm so sorry, my medication is wearing off. I'm having big mood swings. They're crazy."
And so, yes, I'd wake up with, an elbow in my face. But to get her up in the morning was the issue, because she never wanted to get up on, the first shake, or not even the second. So I just chalked it up to her being more like Tyler, because it takes him a while to get up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But...
No, you think it's the medication?
Yeah.
All right,
Okay, so there's a few things that need to be addressed here. First of all, Tatiana's saying that Tyler also thrashes around in his sleep. That is a classic sign of someone with ADHD. I am a shocking person when I'm in bed. I'm all over the bed. I had a friend when I was a teenager who was even worse than me, and she actually put her foot through the wall one night when she was in bed. Now, this comment about Maddie's medication, and Maddie saying that one evening saying to Tyler that she felt that her medication was wearing off and that she was having crazy mood swings. That to me says more that Maddie had become dependent on hydroxyzine, because hydroxyzine is not a slow-release medication. By the following evening, her medication was well and truly worn off. For an adult, hydroxyzine is going to wear off in 4 to 6 hours. We don't know the dose that Maddie was on, so maybe hers took longer to wear off. Certainly the issues with her waking up of a morning could be the hydroxyzine still at play, or it could just be typical ADHD. When I was a teenager, getting me out of bed to get ready for school of a morning usually involved Mum opening my bedroom door and letting my chihuahua into the room, who would then fly through my room, jump on my bed and lick my face. It was the easiest strategy for her, because I used to be grumpy as all get up as a teenager when I got woken up of a morning, so that way she didn't have to actually encounter me herself, and she knew that with the dog in my face I had to get out of bed. So we can't say for certain if Maddie having trouble getting up of a morning was the hydroxyzine or just her natural body clock, essentially. Like I've said, hydroxyzine is not ideal for children. So we don't know the dose, so we don't know how long it was lasting, but it certainly wouldn't have been lasting through to the evening. So Maddie saying that she was having crazy mood swings and that her medication was wearing off, definitely, for starters, suggests a physical dependence on the hydroxyzine, that sense that she wouldn't be able to get to sleep if she didn't have it. And it's probably the case, unfortunately, because you do become reliant on stuff like that. But in terms of the saying she was having crazy mood swings because her medication was wearing off, that to me sounds possibly psychosomatic. She believes that, well, my medication must be wearing off because this is normally when I have it. It sounds to me like she didn't really have an understanding of the medications that she was on. It's also possibly a learned behaviour, given what Jen is like. I can imagine, based on the stories we've heard from Jen, her talking about how she at times would need to send Maddie to sleep with Stefan so she could have her medications and get a decent night's sleep. I would imagine, when we look at what Stephen has said, when we look at the things Jen has said, that maybe this was one of Jen's classic excuses, that her meds were wearing off, she was having crazy mood swings, and she didn't want Maddie in the bed with her because she needed to take her meds or something. But I do think that perhaps this notion of meds wearing off and having crazy mood swings is either psychosomatic or learned behaviour, or simply anxiety. Maybe she was starting to feel anxious because she was tired. She was in an unfamiliar situation with people that she really didn't know. So it could just be that she was reaching a point in the evening where she was tired, that was making the anxiety worse, and she was putting it down to medications.
Do you know, you may not know this, do you know if Jennifer was taking that same type of medicine?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Does she talk about her relationship with Jen and her relationship with Stefan?
I asked her if her mother and Stephen were still together, and she says no, they're not together. She, loved her mom, because every time I would make a little bit of a snarky comment, she would correct me and say everybody's beautiful in their own way. And we never really talked about Stephen when she was around, just to say that they weren't together.
How was her demeanor when she answered that?
It was well, they're not together, whatever. Just...
Would you call that dismissive?
Dismissive, yeah.
So this isn't the first time we've heard reference to Maddie being dismissive of Jen and Stefan no longer being together. And the thing with this, and I need to be careful how I say it, Stefan would have allowed Maddie to feel in some way that she was in a relationship with him. Now, probably by 12, 13, she was starting to understand that that was not normal or appropriate. But on some level, her relationship with Stefan, her connection with Stefan, was more about the way Stefan related with her as opposed to the way Stefan related to Jen. So him and Jen no longer being together wasn't significant to Maddie because it had not changed her relationship with Stefan. And I'm not trying... I know I'm fumbling over this, because it wasn't a relationship. He was grooming her, he was manipulating her, he was traumatising her. It was, even part of it would have been a trauma bond. But what I'm saying here is that he didn't move out when him and Jen broke up. He stayed in Jen's bed for 6 months and then he moved upstairs. His relationship with Maddie did not change in any way after he broke up with Jen. So on an emotional level, him breaking up with Jen had no impact on Maddie whatsoever, because the only way her world changed was that Stefan was sleeping upstairs. Although as we learn more and more about the dynamics in the house, we know that that room was kept empty, so I can't help wondering if that room was kept empty for Stefan, so that Jen could check out and send Stefan and Maddie upstairs when she didn't want to be a parent. So it's possible that Maddie's world didn't change in the slightest when Jen and Stefan broke up, which is why she would have been dismissive of it. As for Maddie reacting when Tatiana made snarky comments about Jen, first of all, amusing. I think it was a little bit wrong of Tatiana to do that in front of Maddie, because regardless of Maddie's relationship with her mother, she still is her mother. But in terms of Maddie standing up for Jen when that was occurring, I'm going to be straight here and I'm going to say that I have no doubt that Jen was emotionally abusive of Maddie. Everything we've heard from Jen with regards to Maddie has been so negative. So I do believe that Jen was emotionally abusive. And the thing is, when you live with an emotionally abusive parent, yes, they cause you so much pain and you spend so much time in fight or flight mode because you never know what sort of mood they're going to be in. You never know if that thing that you said yesterday that was perfectly fine, if you say it again today, you don't know if that's going to cause a different reaction and cause a negative impact on you. So, yes, Maddie would have been in a constant state of fight or flight with Jen, but in between all the emotionally abusive crap, the way people like that work, the way someone like Jen works, is that she still would have shown love towards Maddie. She wouldn't have been 100% of the time horrible to Maddie. It would have been, especially we're talking someone bipolar, so someone with mood swings as well, that you never know what kind of mood they're going to be in and how they're going to treat you. So Maddie had a complex relationship with Jen, I am guessing. So even though it wasn't a perfect relationship, even though I believe it was an emotionally abusive relationship, Maddie still had that loyalty to Jen because she was still her mother, and she would have still shown her love at times. I mean, we've seen how incredibly manipulative Jen is, and I'm willing to bet that manipulation extended to Maddie. And you can't manipulate someone unless they have a positive emotional connection to you. If you don't have that positive emotional connection, it just becomes bullying, essentially. And it makes it impossible to manipulate them because eventually they jack up and they tell you to go GF. So seeing how manipulative Jen was shows us that she would have been manipulative of Maddie. She would have needed to love bomb her on occasions to keep her in that sphere where she could continue to manipulate her. So, of course, Maddie's going to defend Jen when someone gets snarky about her, because she didn't hate her mother. She just had a complex, really confusing relationship. Like I said, this is my opinion based on everything we've heard from this case. I may not be 100% correct on this. I may not even be 10% correct on this. This is just my observation and my thoughts. But, yeah, bad move on Tatiana's part to snark about Jen in front of her daughter, regardless of anything that Maddie may or may not have said about Jen. And I guess it's, it's no different from when you see someone who is in an abusive relationship and you try to step in to help them out of it and they attack you for it. You hear of that so often as well, because it is that emotional bond that allows the manipulation and allows the abuse to continue.
Okay, so upset or like angry or just kind of like, how would
Kind of
you?
emotional reaction. Did she seem like she was uncomfortable? Did she seem like, how did she seem to you?
She just seemed like she was just casually talking to me. It wasn't like a angry emotion or anything like that.
Kind of the problem is I would ask surface level questions on if she was happy, but she always answered pretty vaguely, and so I just truly never knew anything was wrong. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Keep talking. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So she was just kind of like just dismissive, like we were just talking like, oh yeah, they're not together anymore, and I'm like, okay.
I know hindsight is 20/20, and you guys kind of only had a couple interactions with her yearly. But did you see any change in her personality over the last couple years? Do you anything that stands out?
I felt like the last time we met in October was the only time we ever really saw each other, is how I would describe it. When I'm being metaphorical when I say I saw her for the first time and she saw me for the first time, and we really felt like we connected. Other than that, it's always been like she hasn't felt like I'm sorry, this is just father talk, but it's like I've been watching her grow, but she hasn't felt like a whole person with her own questions and curiosity and motivations until the last time I saw her. She seemed like more an adult than a child, and it's not that it bothered me, it's just that it made me curious on what caused the sudden change in growth. Like, she went from being a silly little girl to being what I would describe as a Euphoria character, which Euphoria is a show all about kids who are dealing with crazy levels of trauma.
You're referring to the show with...
I think her name is Zendaya.
Zendaya, yes, okay.
And, yeah, I watched that show recently with my wife, and then when my daughter came to this, I couldn't stop thinking about that show. Just because I don't know how to explain it. These young girls have this 1,000-mile look on their face that I would expect out of, like, Vietnam veterans, not fucking little girls. Like, I'm not saying that there wasn't trauma there. I'm saying as a man who has experienced trauma, that's what confuses me, is how so many young girls have that look in their eyes of, like...
Okay, so he's saying that essentially that October was really the first time him and Maddie connected on any sort of emotional level, and he describes her as previously being like a silly little girl and then having changed to being like a Euphoria character. I'm going to address a silly little girl comment first. So he's saying she hasn't felt like a whole person with her own questions. Now, he hadn't seen her for 2 years before the last time he saw her. So obviously she's grown up from being a little 10-year-old girl to being a far more mature 12-year-old going on 13. There's a huge developmental gap there. If you compare a 10-year-old with a 12-year-old, there is a huge difference. So, on one hand saying that, she's just completely changed since the last time he saw her, we have to acknowledge here that he's missed a large portion of her emotional development and hasn't seen her going from a child to a preteen. That noise in the background, Mouse has rediscovered his favourite toy. Now, in terms of saying, it's the first time he really connected, it sounds to me like Tyler's not really had a lot of interaction with young kids. Because you can connect with young kids if you know how to relate to them on their level. And you can have conversations with them that are on their level. So I don't know if it's just his way of trying to describe her going from being childlike to being more mature and having a more mature understanding of the world. Now, he does compare her to a Euphoria character and refers to her having that 1,000-mile look. And yes, we've seen that look in Maddie's eyes with the photos of her when she was a little bit older. But I'm wondering if, again, this is something he is now relating to after the event. He says that when he first saw her, that was what he felt. But we've seen already how open to suggestion he is. So is he thinking back and thinking, well, that's what he felt the first time he saw her? Or is he just convincing himself that that's what he first thought with everything else he knows in mind? Because, he himself admits that he's emotionally and mentally confused at that point in time. He's still coming to terms with what's happened. So trying to understand events from 5 months earlier is going to be a challenge. Now I'm going to say, if he did, when Maddie was there, see what he thought were signs of trauma, why did he do nothing? You can't expect in a 4-day period of time to connect enough with a child who may be experiencing trauma in their life for them to confide in you and tell you what's going on, for them to trust you enough to actually tell you what's going on, to ask for your help. And it's a little bit naive to think that just because you're her father that you can get that trust in a 4-day period. But then he also says he never knew anything was wrong. So I think that he is perhaps applying his knowledge in retrospect, basically. That maybe he didn't really notice anything when Maddie was there, staying with him and Tatiana. But now when he looks back on it, he thinks, well, that look in her face, yeah, actually now I can interpret it this way. And you know what, I do hope that is the situation, because if his version of it, where he says that he saw this 1,000-mile stare that is a sign of trauma, and that he felt that she was like a Euphoria character, if he genuinely believed that when Maddie was staying with him back in October, then regardless of whether or not he was able to get to the bottom of it in that itty-bitty 4-day period of time, shame on him for not following up. Shame on him for being too proud to talk to Jen about it, or too proud to contact Tatiana, or too proud to go beyond surface level conversations with Maddie and actually ask her outright, are you okay? Are you being treated right at home? I mean, given time, if you're able to form a trusting relationship with a child or a teenager, then seemingly surface level questions can be effective. Questions that aren't really direct, that are going to make them shut down. Because it's showing that you are interested in what they have to say. And if you are asking the right questions, you may get the right answers. But to expect to get to know a kid in 4 days, and in that time ask surface level questions that are going to give you the answers that you want, it's never going to happen. Meanwhile, if he was convinced that there was some sort of trauma there with Maddie, then why, when he sent her back home again, did he only bother to try and make contact with her, 3 or 4 times? Because, as a parent, regardless of whether or not you have custody over that child, that they're your genetics. You have a responsibility. If he was truly concerned about Maddie, concerned about her welfare, why didn't he make an effort to talk to Maddie once a week, twice a week, or at the very least on a regular basis? But he didn't. So I'm just wondering what the real story is here. I mean, did he recognise trauma in Maddie and then just turn his back on her when he sent her home? Or is he looking at it in retrospect and thinking, yeah, that deep look in her eyes, now that I think about it, she's like a Euphoria character.
How often did you have contact with Maddie prior to October?
How often? It was infrequent, unfortunately. I struggle with ADHD, and so did Maddie. And what that looks like for us is really bad time blindness and realizing you haven't talked to people for months and then reaching out awkwardly and trying to.
I mean, I would text her.
How often?
I've always struggled with regular communication, and earlier in Maddie's life, Jennifer used to give me really big issues about that. And then I thought Jennifer was growing as a person because I couldn't tell you when, but just sometime halfway through Maddie's life, Jennifer just became a lot less judgmental and mean about it. She was just like, hey, I get it. You have stuff going on. We have stuff going on. And so I felt like that was us getting close. I felt like that was Jennifer understanding us more at the time, but now I'm curious.
All right.
Okay, so I get what he's saying in terms of having infrequent contact because of ADHD. You do just get kind of caught up in everyday just distractions. And unless something is routine, then it's something that you don't necessarily remember to do. I must admit, there are a lot of my friends that I don't keep in contact with nearly as much as I should. And I recognise that's an ADHD thing. It's not that I don't think about them, It's just that my brain is in so many places through the day that stopping to write a text message or an email doesn't necessarily occur to me. And so many people who have ADHD, myself included, are not good with conversations on the phone. It's not that we don't like talking to people. It's something that I actually discovered in more recent years. It's about the distraction level. If you are talking to somebody on the phone, you're only getting auditory input. You're not getting the visual input where you're sitting and they're looking at their face. So your visual input is all the other things that's going on around you. So you feel almost like you can't quite hear everything that they're saying on the phone. It becomes a challenge to follow the conversation. You may see someone who's got ADHD, when they go to make a phone call, they may stick their finger in their other ear, or they may head off into another room to make the phone call. And it's not them being rude, it's not them trying to exclude the people around them from some big secret. It's about other noises adding to the distraction of trying to focus on someone's voice when you don't have the visual backup of looking at their face. That said, we're talking about Tyler's daughter here. Doesn't matter if you are ADHD. If you are a parent, then you should be making the effort. You should care enough to want to connect and set up a routine. Make it Sunday nights. There's a good chance Maddie's going to be home Sunday nights. So you arrange for a phone date every Sunday night at whatever time it is that she's finished dinner before she's getting ready for bed. Or Sunday afternoons before dinner time if her bedtime routine's going to interrupt. You make the effort because she's your daughter. So while I understand what he's saying in terms of the ADHD, I'm sorry, but I just cannot give him any grace over that. Meanwhile, what he's saying about Jen is actually quite revealing. And he's saying that this went on until about halfway through Maddie's life. So maybe, for the first 6 or 7 years of Maddie's life, Jen was making it difficult for him to make contact with Maddie. Now, you've heard my views on this. Sure, she can make it difficult, but if he was determined enough, he would have fought for some kind of access. But we do have to acknowledge what he's saying here. So he's saying that Jen created big issues about him having communication, having regular communication with Maddie. And he says that, in the last maybe 6 years or so, she became a lot less judgmental and mean about it. What does that say to me? That says that she had an emotionally abusive relationship with Tyler. She was weaponising the simple thing of him having access to Maddie. She was using it as a way to manipulate him and as a way to be controlling. And in order to prevent him from, or in an attempt to prevent him from fighting back about her preventing him from having access to Maddie, she was emotionally abusive. Whatever Jen's issue with Tyler was, she used Maddie as a weapon against him. She made it hard for him to gain access to Maddie, and she was emotionally manipulative, emotionally cruel, in order to keep the upper hand. But here's the thing, even if there is this power imbalance, Tyler had Tatiana there for support as well. And she's saying that she used to text Maddie. So she was being the responsible adult in the situation. She was the one who made sure that Maddie still had some sort of connection with her father, because she recognised that perhaps Tyler was dropping the ball a bit. And kudos to her for doing that. But it should have gone further than that. This is where she could have encouraged Tyler to fight back against Jen. Encouraged Tyler to see that he did have rights to Maddie. And perhaps encourage Tyler to recognise that actually he had a responsibility, and that he should have put aside his own emotional issues for the sake of connecting with his daughter. Now, obviously, it's far, far more complex than that. There's a lot of emotional issues there. There's a lot of psychological issues there. But the thing that stands out to me is that Tyler was only reliant on Jen for access to Maddie, meaning that fighting back against her emotional abuse, the only thing he had to lose was access to Maddie, because he already didn't have that relationship with Jen. Given that he wasn't getting access to Maddie, he really had nothing to lose by fighting back against Jen. It's not like someone in a domestic situation where the person they live with is emotionally abusive, so they have to be the peacekeeper so they can exist in their everyday life. There was that separation which should have enabled him to try and fight for a chance to have access to Maddie. You know, like I said, it's a complex situation, and without knowing all the elements, obviously we can't really pass judgment on it. But once again, I go back to what I was saying, well, what I've said several times now. If you want something badly enough, you make it happen. If he wanted to really be a father to Maddie, he would have moved heaven and earth to make that happen.
Going back to, you say it's infrequent on how many times you spoke with Maddie. So are we talking once a month?
Some weeks we would talk every day just because our schedules allowed us, and then sometimes we would go, I think, a couple of months without really interacting in any way.
Okay.
And that was pretty typical of our relationship. Just very high intensity communication for a time, and then kind of dormancy.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, can we look at this for what it really is? He's saying that, you know, there'd be times when they'd be talking every day, and then there'd be months in between talking again. Well, that's got nothing to do with schedules. He's making excuses again. What I see there is someone who has briefly remembered that he's got a daughter, and for some reason or other realised that he's probably obliged to be a father and talk to his daughter and actually, you know, take on the father role. So he's made the effort for a handful of days, for a week or so, because he's got it. He said that he does want to do the father thing, and then the novelty of that has worn off. Other things have come into his world that have become a distraction. He gets out of the habit of doing so. Maddie's once again forgotten. Until a few months later, when the cycle is repeated. This is not someone who really felt a connection to their daughter. This is someone who felt an obligation to act like a parent. Someone who felt an obligation to play the father role, but because they didn't have that emotional need to do so, they could just put it aside whenever it suited. It sounds to me like there was no deep emotional desire to connect with his daughter. He hadn't spent enough time trying to make that connection, and so he didn't feel the need to try and continue. On those occasions when he tried to make the connection, it only went for a little while because the connection just wasn't there. It wasn't something that drove him. He wasn't emotionally connected to being a father. Or at least nothing more than on a surface level. Had he really, really been invested in Maddie's life, invested in being a part of Maddie's world, then he would have made that connection. Not just bombing her with phone calls for a week and then forgetting her for several months, but setting up something regular where you did speak to her once a week or something. That's how you build a connection. It just seems to me from everything he's said here that to Tyler, Maddie was just as disposable as she was to everybody else. Maddie was only ever an afterthought. I mean, honestly, it sounds like he didn't even know when Maddie's birthday was. And I'm willing to bet that if Maddie ever got birthday messages from Tyler, or birthday presents, or birthday cards, it was probably because Tatiana remembered and told him to do it.
All right, so I will do my best to keep you abreast of this investigation. Whatever information I share with Jennifer, I will share with you. This is a pretty high-profile case, as you can tell by it's made national news and stuff like that. So the stuff that we release is going to be very minimal. And it's not to say anything against you and or Jennifer. It's just when we do these types of investigations, we keep a lot of stuff close-knit just because you have, if you want to quote-unquote armchair quarterbacks that look into these things, and we don't need that happening. So,
Acknowledged. That's exactly why I stopped coming up with my own scenarios and wanted to reach out to you, as I realized I was myself joining in on the armchair quarterbacking, and that is very much not what we want to do in this situation.
Yeah. So you may hear from me on a daily basis, or you may hear from, it may be a few days or a week or so before I contact you again, okay?
Completely understood, sir. Thank you.
All right. Do you have any questions for us that we might be able to answer for you?
Give me a minute to think. Sorry. You may ask whatever you have.
Would it be possible we could reach out to a victim service advocate?
Yes, I will take your number down, and I will have our victim advocate reach out to you.
Okay, because the press is kind of getting to the point where they're contacting us every day.
So my question to you is, I was, until recently, physically in Orlando I was originally going to try to make myself physically available to you guys, but frankly, the emotional weight was tearing up my friends' lives too. This is really heavy shit, and I'm just trying to take care of my family and myself. So my question to you is, do we need to be ready to come down there at some time, or are we trying to kind of make our way back to Texas at this point? I don't know what I should be doing in this case.
Yeah, you can go back to Texas.
Okay.
If we need you, or if we need to become face-to-face with you to gather more information, something like that, we will make a trip out to see you.
Okay, outstanding. In the meantime, would it be acceptable behavior if I were to, say, travel to visit my parents in Kansas, or is that something you would advise against at this time?
No, absolutely.
My parents haven't been able to come down to Florida to grieve with us, so that was kind of my, not this week, but in a month I intend to visit my parents in Kansas. Should that be acceptable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so that answers that question about Tyler's parents. They were actually even further away from Orlando than Tyler was. So it seems like Maddie didn't even have her other grandparents within range. I wonder if they communicated with her, if they had connections with her, or if Jen just completely prevented them having any access.
As for the press, I know you said the press has been contacting you. Once again, you're adults. I can't tell you what or what not to do. Only thing I can do.
Anybody at this point in time, we'll talk with victims advocates and legal representation to figure out if that's in the case's best interest at any point. But I have no horse in this race. I'm content to just stay off of the pages and grieve in private.
Okay, so what I would do though is any press that reaches out to you or something like that, if you do not want to talk to them, you can always defer them to our police department, and our public information officer will handle all those requests.
I appreciate that. I will direct any further people that reach out through you guys.
Okay.
So obviously with Tyler not being privy to a lot of the information regarding the investigation, they've got no problems with him talking to press, but they're basically saying, look, your choice, you're a grown-up, but if you don't want to, direct them towards our station. And you see that. I mean, we know that in terms of the Delphi case, there were a lot of people that were interviewed in the background that basically were expected to stay quiet until the trial. In Maddie's case, I think there's probably a lot of people who have been spoken to who we won't know about until the trial, but in terms of Tyler, he only has surface level information, nothing significant. So, just the standard, just refer the press to us if you don't want to talk to them.
Is there a number, or in fact, if I was going to, what should I say when I'm directing them? Is there a number or an email I should give them?
Just tell them no comment. You can contact the Kissimmee Police Department. That's all you got to say.
No comment. Contact Kissimmee Police Department. Thank you so much.
You got it. And I will be in touch with you, like I said, in the next few days. I'll probably reach back out to you.
Outstanding. I appreciate that.
All right. Yes, sir. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
All right. We're going to conclude this interview at 2:42 p.m.
Okay, I have an important question. Something that has been one of those things that we all accepted in terms of it being a truth in Maddie's case, and that was the story that Tyler had basically taken legal action against Jen to get Maddie's her ashes, and had taken Maddie's ashes back with him. So, well, that didn't come up in this interview. So where did that information come from? Is this another bit of information that was put out by that H-Ghost stuff, or fed by him to Jay Scott or Jenny Esquivel or whatever her name is. Because if that's not the truth, then I feel bad, because it's something that I've been saying for the last 10 months or so as being factual. And now I don't know if it is. So if you know where that information came from, please do leave a comment below and let me know. I'm guessing it's possibly come from a similar source as the rumour that was put out there that Jen never went to Maddie's funeral, which we know is just a complete load of bunk. So it seems that we have also been misled here in terms of Maddie's ashes. Because, I don't recall seeing any media interviews with Tyler. So to me that says that the source of that information is probably the same source of information that a lot of misinformation came from, which is the little trio, and who knows who was actually sharing the information first, but that trio of H. Ghost, Jenny Escobar and Jay Scott, because there was a period of time before H. Ghost was exposed when they were all sharing information saying that it had come directly from Tyler and Tatiana, and all claiming that the information had been given directly to them. So it's hard to separate the three of them in terms of who had what information where. Now, that brings us to the end of Tyler's interview. I think there's a lot of information in there. I think that debunks a few of the rumours that are being shared, especially like the one of Jen not having attended Maddie's funeral. It also gives us a bit more insight into Jen, and it makes me even more convinced that Jen was not a victim of Stefan. Jen was manipulating a situation to suit her own needs. It suited her to have Stefan interested in Maddie because it allowed her to check out, as Stephen Young would say. After Stephen Young walked out, Stefan was the perfect find for Jen. Someone else that she could basically fob Maddie off onto and ignore her parental responsibilities. Now, I've not yet made up my mind in terms of what interviews I want to look at next. I definitely want to go back over the law enforcement interviews that the Stearnses did, but I also want to dig into the interview with the Disney girlfriend, because I think a lot of people steered away from that after she was causing issues for creators for discussing her interview. I'm willing to take that gamble. But, let's be realistic here too. She's on the list of depositions, meaning that she's probably going to be a key witness in both of Stearns' trials. So if she's got an issue with YouTubers talking about her, she's got a big surprise in store. So on that note, I'm going to finish up here. Thank you for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button and please leave a comment below. Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.
to my